Hello everyone, John Maher here. It is Thursday, the 13th of August, and this is your Grass10 update on the Dairy Edge. Well, I start, I suppose, by reminding ourselves of the podcasts that I was doing in the spring. Someone said to me yesterday that I was hoping for rain that they would stop in the spring, and now you're hoping that it will fall. Yeah, what a strange turn of events, but that's the lie of the land at the moment. But looking at the stats in a bit more detail, I suppose, in early July, which is about when this whole drought started for many parts of the country, and if you look at the stats for the south, we were about a month ahead in terms of rainfall. But if you looked at in more detail at Cork Airport, I suppose, and Johnson Castle and Wexford, we were about 3 months ahead, almost 3 months ahead. So I suppose there had to be a dry spell somewhere along the way. Anyway, if you draw a line from Dundalk to Shannon Airport, west of that line, the growth rates are largely doing okay. And I suppose they've averaged 49 for the week gone by. But a different story then if you were east of that line with growth figures of less than 10 in Carlow, Wexford, Kildare, Wicklow, Kilkenny, Waterford, Meath are not far behind. And then the Munster counties, with the exception of Kerry and the Midland counties, in the 20s. So for the record then, the grass supply was about 500 kilograms of dry matter with an average farm cover of 176 kgs per livestock unit across the whole country. But there are people who were not measuring at the moment, so I suppose it's just an indicator. Growth was an average 30 and demand was 35. The average diet was about 10 grams of grass, 5 kilos of meal and 4 kilos of silage, and the average pre-grazing yield was 1,000 kilograms of dry matter per hectare. I suppose, looking at the figures very, very quickly, we're supposed to be building grass in August. And when you look at demand at 35 per day and growth at 30, it's not where we want to be, let's put it that way. So for those west of that line of Dundalk to Shannon Airport, they have to be building grass. I suppose when you look at the east of that line, there are parts now that are just running out of grass and have little or no grass left in the diet, particularly in the southeast corner. For the record, dry matters in Athenry were 21, in Moore Park there were 26, and Oak Park there were beyond the 30s. And that is just a reflection of the growth rate. So the lowest growth rate in Carlow and the highest dry matter and the highest growth rate in Athenry and the lowest dry matter. Anyway, that's the story for where we are with grass in terms of dry matters and growths and things. So then trying to deal with the farm situation, I suppose for the south and east and Midlands, where the vast majority of farms now have a farm cover well below 500. If you go to the southeast corner, there's many well below 250, which means it's basically game over in terms of grazing, really, to be honest. The soil moisture deficits range from about 60, which is, if you got some rain, would bring it back into the 50s and 40s, which would bring growth back into the mix. But there are many parts in the southeast in particular, they're close to 100. So if you are that, it's going to take some level of rainfall to come out of that, to be honest. And as I said, some farms are no longer able to keep grass in the diet and are having to consider different feed options and different ways of doing that. But anyway, on that, I suppose ideally at least half the diet should be made up of a forage. That's a kind of a guideline, for people anyway. The water availability for animals has to be kept a closer eye on now because the food will be so much drier. There are reports of people running into problems with SCC and milk quality issues as well. So just to remind you of those things, the fertilizer story is very, very simple. No point in spreading, so I'll just move on. When you are when you're east of that line, and I suppose that brings us to the next situation. It's not uncommon now for me to get calls in which people are eating into their winter feed supply. So there has been assessment done. A lot of the surpluses have been fed. A lot of the bits and pieces of zero grazing, red clover, silage, zero grazed, outblocks, all those kind of things are kind of gone now. The spare bales are kind of gone in many parts of the country. So you'd need an assessment of where we're at, particularly in terms of the amount of silage that's in the yard and the amount of quality silage in the yard. I refer to that one because some quality silage has to be ring fenced off for next spring. I'm going to say a bale and a half a cow as a guide for those doing a reasonable job of grass. There's those who get away with less. There's those who require more. But, just to be clear about that, there has to be an assessment of what stock is going to be overwintered as well now. But anyway, I suppose carrying out a fodder budget wouldn't be no harm, and that's available in Pasture Base, and there's a video link with Caitlin there on that, I suppose. But if you want to go into the fodder budget in Pasture Base, it's there to help you and give you guidance on doing that and see where you're at. We get a nice few queries about reseeds as well, especially the ones sown in June and July. The weed burdens are starting to become a problem because some weeds, like say fat hen now, or lamb's quarter, depends where part of the country you're from and what you call it. Dung weed is another name for it. that thrives in ground in drought conditions and can get very, very large very, very quickly and get very, very dense in population very, very quickly. So, if the grass is anyway good enough, I think a herbicide has to be considered. But, applied in the evening, many of those weeds can establish quite quickly in drought conditions, fat hen being the worst. Docks do okay too, so does redshank. But I suppose you need the reseeds as a kind of a tree leaf stage in order to apply a herbicide. Some reseeds, unfortunately, are struggling and they're struggling to put down deep roots, and the roots have turned up in some cases because to come after the moisture that fell if you got it about 10 days ago, and they would fail the pull tests. So you have to wait a bit for before you go at those. I've actually had to recommend some people to go with a more, with the more will slice the grass rather than pull it. And you're kind of grazing up that patch every time you do a 12-hour allocation with it, I suppose. That's the way basically saying. But you have to wait for the roots to get anchoring if they keep pulling it up, and for higher cover to come as well, which would make life easier for the plant to root. And if it has to be cut, then at least you have a resistance for the more. If I go west of that line of Dundalk to Shannon Airport, I suppose they are growing pretty close to normal, and they have to focus on building cover and build average farm cover. The target is to be on a 30-day rotation by September 1st, and a cover per livestock unit of 300 kilograms of dry matter. If you have an average farm cover of 600 now and you're about 20 days away and you're trying to get to 900, which many will have to try and do, that's a build-up of 300 kilograms of dry matter over 20 days, or therefore demand has to be 15 kilograms less than the growth rate to get to those numbers. So if silage ground comes in back into rotation, that makes the job of building cover much, much easier. But if you are stocked at 3 cows per hectare on the platform, and your average farm cover is 600, you are going to have to try and get closer to 1,000. And there's going to have to be a growth of at least 15 ahead of demand, I suppose, to do the numbers, right? And fertilizer can be spread on those type of farms as well. So before I get into our feature farmer, then I suppose if I was to describe the drought situation, there are those in the south and southeast who have little or no grass in the diet. There are those who are west of that line between Dundalk and Shannon Airport who are largely getting on okay. And then there's another bunch who have about 5, 6, 7 kilograms of grass in the diet, a level of silage and a level of meal. That's places like maybe Cork, Limerick, parts of Tipperary, I suppose, and the Midlands. That's working okay. It's not easy, but it's working okay. So today's feature farm is a Teagasc farm, because it's very hard for someone like me to ask, or the Grass10 team, to get people to do the feature farmer when things are going a bit difficult now. So thanks to Anya Murray and Owen McCormack for Clonakilty Farm for doing their story. They got 30 mils of rain about 10 days ago on that famous bank holiday Monday. So they're stocked at 3, the average farm cover of 650, grew 48, and have a demand of 25. So I suppose we're trying to counteract drought and also try and build grass. Difficult thing to do now, but for the record anyway, their current diet is made up of 3 kilos of meal, 8 kilos of grass, and 6 kilos of silage, right? They're on 12-hour allocations as well. And I suppose they plan to keep feeding just to try and keep grass on the farm and try and build cover. Now that'll depend how things go for the rest of August. The weather forecast for next week is to have some level of break in it, but if the soil moisture deficits are large, as in close to 100, it's going to take a lot of rain to get back down to close to 25 or 30 mils. So yeah, that'll depend how that goes. But in this case anyway, they're following the paddocks with solid water at the moment, right, to try and keep things moving in the right direction. The reseeded paddocks have struggled with dry conditions, they tell you that, but they're going back for grazing now for a second time. And the reseeds actually will do better than most in drought conditions. Anyway, for the record, their milk production is about 1.6 kilograms of milk solids. They have a number of different studies with grass only, grass clover with lower levels of nitrogen, and grass clover with down to about 60 units of nitrogen. So that's the studies are going on at the moment. But anyway, that's for another day, and they're all stocked at about 2.5. But for the record anyway, the herd on average was doing about 1.6 kilograms of mixed solids at 532 fat and 392 protein. So thanks to Anya and Owen for doing that. Not easy what they're trying to do, build grass and manage the drought. For fodders, I'm afraid the hole has been a lot deeper and will remain so for a while. That's the reality of it. Anyway, if you'd like to hear more from the Grass10 team, subscribe to the Grass10 weekly newsletter, which is available on the Grass10 page on the Teagasc public website, and the link to this newsletter is also available in the description of this podcast. We'd like to thank those who support the Grass10 campaign, the AIB, Grass and Agro, Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, FBD and the Farmers Journal. This has been your Grass10 update, and I'll talk to you all next week. However, I would say for many who are, in difficulties, time now to assess where you are with fodder and make use of the fodder budget on pasture base to establish where you're at, because we're coming close to the end of August now, and different actions will have to be taken. With that, we'll talk to you all next week, and best of luck.